had the pleasure of sitting down virtually with Norm Riis. Norm retired from Story in 2000. He had a long career with Story prior to that. When I first came to the company, and a few of the old-timers like me have come to the company, Norm was in a leadership role, likely president. In this podcast, you'll hear about his journey from Denmark to the U.S. and his journey within the industry and within the company. There's a lot of history here. There's a lot of lore here. There's a lot to either be reminded of or to learn for the first time. In many ways, when I was young in the company and young in the industry, Norm was part of shaping my image of how things worked and how things looked. So I hope you enjoy this as much as I did. Norm Riis. So rewind from there a little bit to your journey from Denmark to the U.S. Just tell us about how that happened and why that happened.
Yeah, did you get my picture of the Thompson clan?
I did. That's pretty classic.
Jim Thompson was in Denmark in 1952, and he visited us. He visited his sisters. There was 10 kids in that family. Although his brother Andrew was in North Dakota, so there must have been at least 8 siblings that he visited. And in the process, he visited my family, and we had dinner together. And I asked him, if I want to come to America, would you give me a job? And he said, sure, because he knew that I would. I think he had helped some other relatives, some bricklayers, one bricklayer in particular. And I don't think that experience was too good. And I figured out a way to get an exchange program going with the American Scandinavian Foundation, where they would allow me to work. I had to earn $200 a month, and I had to have a return ticket. I could stay only 12 months. So I came. I came in July of 1954. I was 3 weeks out of high school, and I had experience as a surveyor, not as a laborer, but they put me to work as a laborer because there was no surveying work to do.
Sure.
The superintendents would do the layout. So I spent the first 9 months of the 12 allowed to work with Thompsons. And that was quite an experience. Started on the dairy farm, and I worked for Jim Chitty. I worked for Woody Buck, and I worked with Charlie Bell's father, Roy Bell, and a whole bunch of other guys. And
so what did you do on that job?
I was a hot carrier, helped the ironworkers. I would tend to the masons, and I'd clean up. I would run errands. I'd be a water boy. I built some muscles back then.
I bet you did.
I weighed 140 pounds when I came in. I remember stepping off the bus, and old Jim met me. And he said, first thing he said was, "Oh my God, you little shit." You didn't think I was built for construction, but they put me to work anyway. So then after 9 months, I decided I wanted to stay longer. I could go 6 more months. Yeah, all legal, I wasn't going to overstay my visa.
Sure.
So I got a job with Lechner Engineering. I don't think they're there anymore.
Yeah, they're not. Were they in Ames at the time?
Yeah, they're on 5th Street and right kind of where the library is. I think where the Octagon used to be, or maybe still is.
Okay.
That was a nice experience, both being in the field. Later I went in the office. Then on Labor Day, I met Rita. That changed my life, I guess. And then I went back to Europe and decided to immigrate. And again, asked the Thompsons if they would sponsor me. And they were willing to do that. And this was mostly with Russell, the son. So then I came back in 1950, late 56, and went to work for Lechner on the interstate highway system survey group, and traveled all over Iowa. Worked for them for 2 years, and then I'm going to say 1950. 58, 59. Yeah, I worked 59. I went to work for Thompson's. About why I chose construction engineering, and I really didn't. I was a civil engineer, graduated in 1961. And I think the construction engineering program started with Tom Jellinger. You can remember him.
I do.
In about 1960. At that time, construction was under the architect department. They had also what was called architectural engineering, which was later given up. Dean Porath was a graduate from architectural engineering, and that was a little bit of a hybrid, a little bit production, a little bit design, but really didn't fulfill the agenda that the builders wanted. So the builders put a lot of money into Iowa State in the early 60s and hired Tom Jellinger.
So why did you choose civil as compared to any of the other disciplines that you could have chosen at Iowa State?
Well, there was atomic engineering. I certainly looked at it, and electrical engineering, but I thought that was too hard. There was not computer engineering. There was mechanical engineering that didn't interest me. I think I like civil because I had worked as a surveyor back in Denmark for a summer. And that was the pretense actually for coming to this country as a surveyor, working for a construction company, except it didn't turn out that way. But no, I'd always interested in bridges, roads, structures, not buildings per se, but structures. But anyway, I think the association with Iowa State was always important.
Yeah. Who were some of the other construction companies either in town or in the area at the time?
Well, there was Klinger. I was a big competitor for many years until we did the Vet Met together as a joint venture. Would come down. There were smaller companies like Graybow and Boone, and there was a couple of other Boone contractors that were sort of an irritation. But we like competition. We're supposed to like competition. Keep us on our toes.
Right.
I'm trying to think. The Des Moines companies did not come up. And then seemed like every county had a non-union outfit that started coming in. Winnebago, Blackhawk, Sioux. These were all non-union companies named after the counties, just like Story County.
So talk a little bit about the ownership transitions. So it was James Thompson and Sons, and if you can recall sort of the major generations of ownership transition that would be good to remember.
Yeah, so it started as a family company, James Thompson and Sons, Russell and Kenny. And I think at one time when I joined, I think Jim had 20% of the company and Kenny and Russ each had 40%, let's say. Okay. Very early on, I'm sure it was all Jim Thompson. But Jim was a carpenter, and he was a savvy guy. I remember asking on the job site when I first came, I said, why do you guys work for Jim, and what do you admire about him? And these workers would say, well, he knows how to make money. And he did. He's pretty shrewd, and he was well off. And he was a very nice person. He was always nice to me and took care of me. So anyway, that was the ownership, 2040, I think. Then Russ was killed in 1961. I'll never forget it, January 25th. When I found out about it, I was on a job site working part-time as a timekeeper, classroom building out on campus is still there. And he was killed in a train car accident. I saw the pictures on TV at night, and devastating. He suffered from diabetes. He was taking insulin, and the thought was that he maybe it was around noon, and he hadn't eaten, he hadn't taken his insulin, and he became distracted. And there's an intersection where the train comes across down at Mitchellville, Iowa, where we had a prison project, and he was killed instantly. Strange things. So Kenny, well, it was devastating for Jim, the father. But they took in, shortly after that, they took in Woody and Ted as owners. So 10% share.
Okay.
Maybe they, I don't know how that was transitioned, but they became owners then in 1961. Then that lasted for 6-7 years, and I think Ted wasn't happy for Kenny. I think Jim had passed away then, and so I think Ted was looking at leaving. Frankly, go up to South Dakota. He had a friend, Welfel Construction. His friend Bud Welfel, great guy. I think an Iowa State graduate that Ted had known.
Sure.
And there were hints from Ted that he was fed up working for Kenny. And so basically, I think they gave Kenny an ultimatum, Woody and Ted did. And they asked Dean Porath, Dick Johnson, and I if we were on board. Now, you're talking about my second, third cousin, okay?
Yes.
Kenny.
Yes, I know.
Well, they basically canned him. So they just bought him out. And when they did, Kenny lost his job. That's a reality.
Yeah.
And yet it had to happen because Ted would have left maybe, and the company would have not been as vibrant as it became.
So when you came into ownership then at that time, what was the ownership split between Ted and Woody, and then you and Dick and Dean?
Well, I think Ted liked Dick Johnson. Okay, they were working together, bookkeeping, and so I think Ted sold 2 shares to Dick before he even considered Dick and I.
Okay.
And so when we found out about that, then Dean and I just went in and talked to Ted and said, if you're going to include Dick, you have us 2. So we got 2 shares. We all got 2 shares. And it cost like $700 maybe.
Okay.
That was an investment in 1968. As a matter of fact, I still have the check that I wrote. Somewhere is in my file. That would have been 1968. Kenny was out, and Woody became president. Ted became executive vice president or whatever. Now, we all got titles.
Yes.
That was so important back then. And we eventually, Dick, Dean, and I all got the same number of shares, the same pay, the same bonuses, et cetera, et cetera. So Woody and Ted, whom you know, they both passed away.
Yeah, I never met either of them. I've only heard about them.
Okay. Well, Ted was, he was a bombardier in the second station in England. He joined the Army, I joined the Air Force, whatever, at a young age. We sort of called ourselves already then employee-owned. So it's Woody and Ted probably each had they had the majority together, probably 30% each.
Okay.
And then the three of us each had 10% or whatever. And we called ourselves employee owned, although it's a far cry from what you have now. It was, five guys tight knit, and we got along. So Dean didn't get along with probably Dick.
Sure.
Dean left in 92 or 99, signed a non-compete agreement, and then Dean died young.
When did Ted and Woody, did they retire? How did they exit the company? And then did that ownership revert to you and Dean and Dick? Or is that when more people got invited in?
Let's see. Woody retired at age 65. I think we already had that agreement in place. I mean, okay. I remember signing that agreement when I was 40, and I'm going to retire when I'm 65. I had no idea I was going to support myself other than probably the government's going to take care of me.
Sure.
So when we signed that agreement, everybody agreed to retire at 65. And I was the first one to retire. And he retired at 65. And Ted retired 3 years early. He retired at age 62 in 1984. So do that math on that one. So in 1984, Woody retired, and Dick and I couldn't wait for him to retire. Because then, we bought his stock.
Got it.
Although he had 3 years from 62 to 65 where he kept a voting right. So then in 1984, he retired for good. And then Dick, Dean, and I had a third, or something like that. And I'm trying to think if we had other stockholders. We might have had one or two or three, Charlie Bell.
Maybe Rod Peterson would have been early.
Rod Peterson, probably. Larry Dix, maybe. It just happened over time. And again, you know how close Dick and I were. Very different. Never a harsh word. And we just worked it out.
I remember in the late 80s when I came to work here, I would surmise, and it was part-time and then full-time, but about once a week, I would see you in Dick's side chair or Dick in your side chair, and I could tell you guys were figuring things out, whatever there was to figure out at the time. But yeah, it never looked dramaful.
Well, we're different, which brings up one of the questions that I think Mitch asked about involvement in the community. Dick and I sort of took separate paths. Dick was more likely to be involved with Rotary, economic development, maybe a little bit of politics later on with the Republican Party. I was more of a liberal, involved with the culture in Ames, the Octagon, the Black Cultural Center. I was on the Planning Commission. I was on the Human Rights Commission in Ames. I worked with IOFA, which was the Ames International Music Festival. So that was maybe my European background. I don't know. And part of that was by design, so that Dick was in one part of the community and I was in the other part of the community, and it actually brought us some work.
Right.
And some recognition. I developed quite a relationship with McFarland Clinic, for instance, the medical community and the doctors. Good friends that we would go skiing with, would bike with, hike, have parties with. We enjoyed our time in Ames. We had great friends. We had great parties, and we belonged to the country club, all of us, and played tennis. That's why we did the tennis facility down in Ames.
Sure.
But the exact numbers and when we were transitioning, I can't tell you. because I don't sheets anymore. I actually got rid of a whole bunch of stuff when I thought we were moving. But it was always everybody were treated equally, and then the achievers would raise the prize to the top and get the majority of stock.
Sure.
But we never had one person controlling everything, and we always agreed on things by talking it out.
Well, that persists today.
Yeah, I think the culture of the company is just amazing, and I've watched you guys for 20 years.
How about industry involvement? So you covered some community involvement. What kind of industry involvement did you have related to master builders or really any other, I'll say, contracting associations during your time in the industry?
Became very active in Master Builders of Iowa, and wanted to follow in the footsteps of people like Woody Buck, who had been president. I think Kenny was active, but I don't know whether he was president. I was president of Master Builders of Iowa in 1984. I enjoyed the camaraderie with fellow contractors, people you'd compete with normally, but you would also sit in meetings and determine things that were good for the industry. I was on several committees, and I took a real interest in our association with Iowa State, both doing scholarships and actually I taught for 3. I think they had quarter system. No, they couldn't have. When did they give up the quarter system?
Yeah, it could have been a quarter system. I think it was there.
I think I taught three quarters, and money was important, and mainly important because we could seek out talent that we could employ part-time that might consider going, as for instance, Pat Gary and Mike Esposito.
As for instance, yes. And I know you were a registered professional engineer and probably still are. Were there any associations with that, or was that just a licensure designation?
I think it projects attitude towards my job, my industry, and that is to call yourself professional, which means you try to be as honest as you can, as forthright and open and transparent as you can be. And whether I am or not in people's eyes, I don't know. I've never had a real crisis, but I've had a lot of little where I wondered if I was doing the right thing for a client. And I can relate some things that if I had to do it over, I would not have done what I did. We had a project. We would get tied in with an architect that was real creative and real loose about how they would do drawings and how they would research systems and specify products. And so we get in trouble on some projects because of poor design. I don't know if that happens still. I'm sure
it does. It does. That hasn't. There's been a lot that's changed in 20 years. That hasn't changed.
They were creative. They were great guys, and they would experiment with new concepts, systems, designs, and leave a lot of the details for somebody else to work out. Okay, you get a building done, and there'll be problems. Okay, and then you go, well, it's the architect's fault, or it's the glazier's fault. But we should have stepped up and probably told the owner, yeah, we'll take care of it. But we didn't. We fought back, and so then we lost out on the next project. So those are the things to watch out for. One project that hasn't come up is molecular biology building. That was our first CMA.
Yeah, tell us about that and how it got to become CMA.
Well, the first CMA job for our state was for the for Chuck Frederickson of housing. We did a project. I think it was Friley Hall. It was under time constraints. They had to get it done in, period where students weren't there occupying. And Chuck Frederickson took the chance. I had talked about construction management from as an agent, where we totally look out for their interest, get the best price we can, and put a superintendent on the job. And that's the trick. Put a superintendent on the job that knows how to manage subcontractors and get work done. So we did a Friley Hall, CMA. I can't tell you what year it was. Later, Bill Whitman, who was physical plant.
Facilities planning and management.
Yeah. He gambled on us, and so we had tried to promote construction management from the perspective that it would be a professional service. We would not do any of the work, but we would make sure that it happened. It happened within a time frame. So the molecular biology building, I think we were competing against somebody else, maybe White's, and it wasn't based on fees necessarily, just the owner taking the qualifications into consideration and picking whoever they thought could pull it off. And we got it for the Board of Regents. So it was a first for the Board of Regents to do it. Remember, they thought it was design build, but it wasn't. It was CMA.
Sure.
And we developed big packages, and I think you guys are still doing that now.
We are.
It took a while to get the construction industry, various general contractors and subcontractors to buy into it, but I think they saw it as a viable way to do business because they were treated, again, fairly, and everything was transparent. The bidding was open. There were some hiccups on the molecular biology building, mainly because we got the wrong concrete contractor. He was not prepared to do the job, and he had poor superintendent. So the concrete work did not turn out well.
That was a cast in place structure?
Yeah.
Right. So
that was a tough job, big. And then we had an issue with the drywall contractor. He took the job too low, and that ended up in a mediation where the university paid half and we paid half to settle up. But other than that, at molecular biology building, whenever I'm names, I drive by.
Sure. I recall Jim Voss was a project engineer on that job too.
Yeah. But then we got into, wastewater treatment plants first, and then water treatment plants. It all started with Pella. I've read your history about that. The Pella job, we were $9 million bid. White's was $10 million. We were $1 million low. We made $1 million. So anyway, we decided that we could do all the pipe work, and so from then on we bid wastewater treatment plants. And you're still, the companies still excel, right, in wastewater treatment plants.
We do. Now we have lost a lot of that muscle memory in how to do that, and we're trying to take advantage of the memory that we do have to teach another generation on how to do that. But yeah, that's still part of our work program.
Yeah, and then you graduate from wastewater to water treatment. So that all was so much fun to see that evolve. And there was a lot of work. And we became pretty good at figuring out how to bid those jobs because it's public work. Nobody better get it. I lost a friend over that, though, up in Mason City. Tom Schaefer. You were best of buddies from Hinkle Construction.
Yep.
We went up and we were the low bid in Mason City. This was about the time that Pat Gary went to work for us. I think he was the project engineer on that. So the city wanted to give the job to the local guy. So they awarded the to the second bidder, Inkel, and we said, "Whoa, you can't do that." We called Master Builders. They went to bat for us, and they filed a lawsuit on our behalf with their money to uphold the, no bidder gets the project if you're qualified on a public job. But we lost our friendship with the Schaefer.
So talk a little bit about some of the relationships you had while you were working in the industry. Who were some of your close connections?
Well, the partners I had at Thompson Store and Story were priceless. I mean, Woody Bug, Ted Hagen, Dick Johnson, Ian. We'd love to go to Master Builders of Iowa summer outings, Christmas parties. But going way back, there was a guy called Dan Brennan. I don't know if you remember him or not. He worked for Sales Planning Management Incorporated. But we were using CPMI to do the initial computer work that we engaged with. Reams and reams and reams of paper, not like it is now in the cloud. And he was very instrumental. He and Fred Rabaugh, he
taught
Iranian.
me scheduling at Iowa State.
Okay. Yeah. Fred is out in San Francisco now. Matter of fact, when Jim Rowings were here, Jim Rowings still connect with Fred Rabaugh. And Fred would be the technician or the technical guy. And he was fabulous in terms of delivering the early computer stuff that we needed. So Dan Brennan was in my development. I'd say Jim Rowings has been. And also Bill Whitman, who we became friends with. And he had an influential job at Iowa State. And
right.
he always said, when Story is low, we're all happy.
Yeah.
The other person that I related with was the director at the McFarland Clinic, Chuck Elder.
Oh, sure.
We went skiing together. We played tennis. There were several. Well, Jim Grabaugh. Jim Grabaugh and I are friends still. He was a competitor, and we always figured out a way to get over that. And he was willing to do the general construction bid package on some of our CM work up at the hospital, and performed well.
They're still doing that today.
Yeah.
So tell us about the transition from JT&S to Story and the kind of steps involved with that.
Okay, that was over, I'm going to say 8-10 year period. Started in 1970, 72, and probably lasted until 1980. And it became necessary because being in Ames, it became an attractive place for other bidders to bid, like university work, other projects, schools.
Sure.
So we got competition in the late 60s, the non-union companies from around Iowa being a right-to-work state, make that possible. The union companies typically then would not come up from Des Moines. I think Ted Hagen pretty much masterminded this with help from Woody. And then both Dean, Dick, and I also got involved in that. We took ownership in two companies. And it sort of transitioned over a period of time because we had union contracts with, I think, bricklayers, carpenters, and that was about having all the from Des Moines. We used cement finishers out of Des Moines. We did not have yet a labor union in Ames.
Okay.
or if we did, it started and then it just sort of petered out. So we went from bidding one kind of work to two kinds of work. Work that Story could get needed to be pretty simple initially because we had to train our people. We didn't ask. We gave Thompson employees an opportunity to work on story jobs, and some said yes and some said no way. So there was a little bit of friction that lasted a couple of years. And as you know, more and more Thompson employees eventually came over. Some left and never came back. So then we just transitioned from doing Thompson work to doing mostly story work, bidding story work, and dealing with nothing ever serious in terms of union interference in what we were trying to do. Woody and Ted were very careful in keeping the two organizations seemingly separate. That's where we brought in Bill Allen and Mr. Gray. I'm trying to think what his first name was. So we had a real estate company, we had a development company, we had Story Construction Company, and then Story Ag Company that Dick spearheaded. And then we, I'm trying to think, there was, please understand this for.
Well, I know it, but your recall is amazing. So Mark Allen stopped in maybe a year ago because he had been by the high school and had seen it and stopped to talk to Rob Greenwood. So he was in telling me some of the stories about that and how maybe there was Bill Allen Construction, and did that then become Story, or was that separate from Story?
I think that's correct, but I don't recall that.
Sure.
But that's right. Although Bill Allen started doing housing, so we might have had even 5 companies. We have JTS Development. We had James Thompson Sons. I think we had Story Construction Company, Bill Allen, and then Gray Real Estate. So I think we had 5 companies that. And the ownership was like this, but the resources came from Thompson's initially, the bonding capacity.
Sure.
And we had to have the ownership so that we weren't influencing decisions of the non-union company in favor of them. But again, we had very little difficulty making the transition. It was called double-breasted, and that's what we said. Mm-hmm. And we claimed that separate ownership, separate this, separate that, but yet it was very much intertwined.
So
I was in 1980, 82, it became all Story, and we just we did away with Thompson's.
Yeah, I know we kept that entity for alive for a long time. In fact, it might still be alive, not operating or functional, but we didn't want anybody else to claim it. Talk a little about some of the development activities. So I recall Ford Street development, I think, was you and Dick and Marv, but what kind of development activities did the company and or individuals from the company plug into?
Okay, it started with just Marv, and Marv had a partner back then, and Dick and I. And Porath was in it too, JPR. Marv finally warmed up to us. He was a very particular guy in terms of how he dealt with people, and he was tough. He was demanding. Price was everything. I don't think he understood that there was a difference in the way to serve a customer. But he finally warmed up to us, and that was said about 1985, and we bought the land where you guys are, and it became a development sanctioned by the city. It had some tax deferments and advantages for people that build there. Tax increment financing, I think it's called.
Yes.
And I'm going to say there was 50 acres maybe. And we got it subdivided and built some spec buildings. It was not a moneymaker at first. That was one partnership. So JPR in with Dayton Road Development, 50-50. Marv always had a little more than everybody else. There was three of us, Dean and Dick and I, each a third. We also did something called Park Development, which had Hans Zeiger involved. That was in the research park, building spec buildings. The reason Dick and I did it was we would get a project.
Right.
And we didn't have to compete necessarily. And again, it was cost plus, guaranteed max, open books. We got involved with the airplane. I'm trying to think what the name of that was.
Visionaire.
We got involved with that. And then we had the fitness center, the racket club, which was didn't really become anything until about when Tom got there in 1995. Let's see, there were some others. Well, you guys, you and Dick and somebody, Steve, Pat, you did some investments together.
You did, yes.
And one could go back and say, gee, I should have done a whole lot more of that, because it did turn out to represent some equity that we've have had access to now, which helps in retirement. So I would encourage that, but maybe not at the expense of the construction business suffering. But there is an opportunity, because when you're in the construction business, you have the knowledge of how to build. Right. And you can develop partnerships. You get to do the building, and that was the whole purpose. But it took a while to convince Marv that we were good, honest, and had the right answers. One last, I want to take more time than necessary, but the other effort that we all were part of when it started was design build. Like CMA, which I think Story in particular, showed the way how it's supposed to be done. Right. I mean, it's above. It's. I think it was such a beautiful system, because it's so predictable, and it's transparent, and it's above board. And the other thing you did was design build. And that started about, because a lot of people say design build. Okay, you'll see it. We do design build. Right. Well, they don't. The only way to do design build, we've talked about that, is the contractor is in charge. And any other hybrid thing with the architect or joint or whatever, no. The contractor is in charge, and single responsibility. Let happen whatever happens, but you know who's in charge. And I think you perfected design build. You've done a lot of nice stuff, so including some public work, right?
Yes, currently doing a building at Iowa State. Well, I
get your story newsletter, and I get your annual report, and I peruse the Ames paper online, and I'm just impressed with how you guys excel. I mean, I think you excel. The work you get with the university, the work you get with the school system, it's rewarding to know that, and that's why it makes me so happy that when Jim Thompson came to Denmark to visit, and I hit him up for a job, and he accepted, and I came.
Yeah. Well, this has been really great, and I've been thinking of more questions that I haven't even thought of. So I might we'll take a crack at trying to edit some of this, maybe down into 1 or 2 episodes, and we might seek to indulge you for another one, because the things I'm thinking about are and things that would be meaningful to people inside the company, like the estimating process that you developed or that we developed as a company, and the methods that we use related to contacting subs and what bid day looked like, and how you redlined estimates and all of that. There's some pretty good memory of that, and that'd be good to capture.
Well, it's very nice to stay in touch, and I think this Zoom has worked. So again, yeah, I would certainly talk again, and it's very easy to talk to you, and we know you well. I want you to give my regards to your leadership, Pat Gary and Nurse Burlick.
Michelle.
And I know you come this way, so hopefully we'll stop in Boulder sometime.
You can count on it.
Again.
You can count on it. That'll happen.
All right, Mike.
All right,
thanks
Norm.
for arranging this. Say hi to Brian Hessing and Larry Sperlich and Pat Gary. And
I shall.
Yeah. Great. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. There you have it. That's round 1 with Norm Riis. As we indicated, we'll do another round with Norm to get probably into more details about some of the things he did while at Story that continue to shape some of our processes today. It's amazing to have a resource like that with the recall that Norm has to help us fill in some of the blanks or some of the white space on how Story got to the point it is today, from the people and the relationships and the numbers of transitions in that amount of time. My wife and I have been out to visit Norm and Rita in Boulder, and while he's been gone from the company 20 years, it looks as though he just walked out the door. Their health is tremendous, and they're tremendously active, and we'll look forward to getting Norm on for at least one more round. Thanks, Norm.